Hi everyone, it's Alexa Limpton here, and you know that already. We're here for the Whole Horse Apprenticeship Module 2 webinar tonight, and I'm so pleased to introduce you all to my friend Hillary Schneider. She is the creator of Epona Rise. She has a beautiful space up near Sun Peaks in Kamloops with an amazing herd of horses that I've had the pleasure of spending time with. And I just love the work that she's doing, and I love her focus on this idea of the medicine of horses. So thank you for being here, Hillary. Really excited to have you as a part of this program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit, Hillary. I know there's many people on the call that are stoked about this idea of what it means to understand the medicine of their horses and what that looks like. So, what does that mean to you, like a horse having medicine?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of I guess some background.
Totally.
I guess
Yeah.
For me. So for people who don't sort of know, I'm about kind of like what I do is I well, as Alexa said, I run a retreat center. I have 27 horses, and I well, I do the coaching and leadership in partnership with horses. And then I also, train and mentor women who are also kind of doing similar work with horses as well, equine guided learning or whatever you want to call it. So this whole concept of medicine actually evolved pretty early on when I started doing my own practice, after I did certification. The term medicine is, I kind of borrowed from, Native American philosophy, which basically is that everything has medicine, right? So trees have medicine, horses have medicine, animals have medicine, and really looking at the symbolism of it. And what started happening organically when I was facilitating experiences with my herd, I started to kind of really talk about it based on sort of paying attention to which one of my horses were showing up for people and what was happening for them, like in particular. And the themes that kind of started to emerge. And I think that identifying their medicine also felt like a way of really honoring that horse and its teaching, so there's an acknowledgement piece. I think what's really important for me in the work that I do is the horses are really seen as a true partner, and that they're really empowered in their symbolism of their teaching. And so I really, really pay attention to, and it's like space that I facilitate, a lot of it, we go out at and we see which group shows up, and we really speak about what's significant about that and what's the medicine of this horse. And I think in that, it actually empowers that particular horse. So I find it to be kind of a really empowering and deepens, I think, the interaction between a certain person. And I think it also kind of, really amplifies the teaching of that particular horse as well. That's also evolved to a lot of my horses are quote unquote rescues. And when they come here, I give them a name. And that's also another way of kind of really honoring what they're bringing to the space, and it kind of gives them a new identity, quote unquote, that I think also supports them in their authenticity and through what they do. But I think that the concept of medicine, I connect to the horses, I think, as individual. Yeah, hard to follow. The audio is wonky, and I'm hearing some background too. I don't know.
No, I'm hearing that too. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe it's just me.
Do you want to? Yeah.
Do you have headphones?
Do I have headphones? Yeah, I do actually.
I might change it.
Let me try. Oh, I think I can plug headphones into this computer. Yeah, give me 2 seconds.
Thanks, everyone. Wasn't sure if it was just me.
Hold on a second. We'll see if this works.
Yeah, for sure.
technology.
Yeah, hey.
I don't even know if I'm wearing these right. Does that help? Does that make better?
It makes it
Does that
better
sound
for me.
better?
How's it sound, everybody?
Is that better?
Anybody? Okay. Thanks, Brittany.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah. Sounds better to me. So
Okay.
that's awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, hon.
Okay. Do you want me to start again?
What do you think, everybody? I heard most of it, but maybe just like bring in, because there's a few pieces there that I really wanted to pull forward, like weave forward around, kind of what I've seen, and what's really cool about your space is this sense of that there's these horses, 27 now, that may or may not be alive today if you didn't have them there and recognize their medicine.
Yeah.
That space that we kind of live in, where we're on this, hopefully, a bridge to valuing horses something other than being talented performance horses. And things that I absolutely love about the work that you're doing is these horses come into your, and you're so good at going, what's the medicine here? Like, what does this horse have to offer here? Where's the value? Yeah.
And like I was saying, Lexa, I don't know if it's your sound. Did you want to mute when I'm talking, maybe? Because I can hear feedback. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because that's better. I'm not hearing my own feedback. Yeah. So I think, again, sort of the concept for me around, big difference. Okay. Yeah. The concept for me around the medicine piece, I think, is twofold. Definitely, for sure. I mean, the big part of, the heart of my work is I really want to save the lives of horses and have them feel empowered. And I think it's really important because they come with baggage similar to us, right? And so when a horse comes here, and part of it is they're stepping into a role of being a teacher, I really want to acknowledge them in that. And I think help them. And what I've noticed is that they really are able to shine in who they are, and then what happens is when people come here, the emphasis really isn't about the horses or rescues, and it's really about acknowledging them and their empowerment, which I think is also part of the work that I want to do with people. So there's a twofold thing of, I think it really empowers the horse. And then just in terms of, sometimes in facilitation when I'm working with people, that added tone of the symbolism of who's showing up for them often really lands for them in their own story or their own empowerment of what's going on. It's really sort of cool, I think. And I try really hard not to bias it. When people first come here, I'll add it kind of at the end of their experience, so I don't kind of bias it. But when I kind of weave in a little bit about, here's this horse and here's this medicine, it really resonates for people. And I think it becomes a very impactful honoring of this sort of communion and relationship with them and a certain horse. And so I think it's really honoring for, again, the horse in their teaching, and then also for the people to just understand a different way of seeing these animals. And I think really witnessing in the teachers that they are and what they bring. And I think, part of my work is wanting to highlight the value of these animals goes way beyond, right, just what us riding them. And then also I think, in my own space with them, if a certain horse shows up, it really helps me illuminate, like, what's the energy of this horse that's helping me identify something in me that I really need to tap into. So that I think there's a way of having it to be this kind of really conscious empowerment. And again, we can really highlight the teaching of what this horse is about. That's very impactful for both horse and human, right? So I think it's sort of a mutual beneficial exchange. I don't know if you want to kind of add any or question anything about that piece too.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I love that. And I'd love to, I know my sound's probably terrible. No longer using my mother's computer, everybody. We're cut off. Yeah. But this weaving, because of course here we are, I think everybody on this call is a woman. There's one, I'm not sure, but women and their horses. And so highlighting this part that you talked about, you have 27 horses, all of the reflections back from, is there any horse in that herd that doesn't sort of offer up some sort of teaching or some sort of learning, for you? And I'm guessing the answer is no, there. So I'd love to hear more about, some of the horses in your herd, and what are the different ways that they show parts of you to you?
Yeah. So I guess I can go a little bit into like, how do we know the medicine of our horses too? I think that'll explain it a little bit as well. So there's a couple of different things that I connect to when I meet a horse, and where that concept or acknowledgement of medicine comes from. A lot of it is sort of, there's a blend. Some of it has to do with their story. So what's the story of this horse? And I'll give you an example. I have a mare in my fields that I gave her the name Kali, or, the Hindu goddess of death and rebirth. And part of that is when I meet a horse, I kind of tune in and feel into them. And I just notice if there's any impressions I get just off the bat. If there's sometimes I get like, there's a Hindu goddess or something. So there's an initial curiosity of what is the essence of this horse. So anytime I meet a horse for the first time, that's almost my intention of like being curious about what's the essence of this horse and where do I experience this horse. For Callie, using her as example, part of her story, she was initially rescued from a kill pen in Washington with a foal at side by a Scottish woman who found her a home in Kamloops. And then the woman who had originally adopted her decided she didn't want her anymore because who knows why, and was going to euthanize her. And so this woman who had originally got her out of the kill pen found out about me and basically cried to me in tears. And it's like, what did I save this horse for her just to be euthanized? So there was something about this mare, like literally looked death in the face twice and was like, not happening. Right. And I really felt like there was a really intentional, sometimes I feel this with the horses that come here. It's like they've almost manifested this path for them. And so, Kali, the goddess of death and rebirth, and this mare whose own path really was about looking at death twice. And, there was sort of a symbolism about what her journey was as a horse. So it's a little bit about, again, kind of what's the story of this horse? What's the wounding of this horse too, right? Because I think our medicine is found also in what our wounds are and what some of our, quote unquote baggage is. And then on the other side, like what's the empowerment piece around that? And what are the impressions that I'm receiving when I connect with this horse? I think and again, it's kind of an intuition thing. I have a horse recently that came to join my herd that's boarding here. And the woman who kind of sent her horse for retirement here, I said to her, I think it's important you give this horse a medicine name instead of me doing it. And so I kind of gave her the same thing, like sit with your horse and kind of really feel into what's the theme or what's the essence that you feel that she brings. And she called her Grace. And so what was really interesting about that, when she came to the herd, her integration into the herd actually really mirrored that space of grace. It was probably one of the most easiest transitions I've ever had. And it was very graceful. So there's often, again, how they show up in their beingness and any impressions that I receive. And it's also, so it's really trusting that, like, what am I connecting to? What's the story of this horse? And I think really looking for, the symbolism around that as well. I'll give one more example. The latest one is, I have my newest mare, a pony, her name's a pony. She was a rescue. BC Wildfires actually just got reunited. I just reunited 2 horses at my farm. Yeah, she's a big spotted draft mare. And when I saw her, I immediately had this image. I don't know if anybody has the Linakonov's cards, the Way of the Horse cards. And there's a card 39 of this paint horse, and it's about transformation, right? The butterfly. So when I saw her, I had this image of that card. And I felt like there's like a Native American. So I looked up like Native American transformation butterfly. And then the name a pony came, and that's Blackfoot for butterfly. And to me, this mare really, I felt like there's a connection around transformation. She was, saved from the fires and, the totality of that. So that's where that comes from, is just sort of, being curious about what's the story of this horse, what's their journey been, and then how do I interpret or connect to their energy? And is there any kind of impressions that I get when I tune into them? And I think intention is a really powerful thing. So often I'll just ask the intention of, what is your medicine? And sometimes I just put that question out to the horse, what's your medicine? And, I wait and I sit with it and I see kind of what shows up. Sometimes it also is connected to something that is going on in my own life. I often will pay attention to what I'm journeying through when a certain horse shows up, and what's the connection point there, in terms of what's symbolic about that. So, those are sort of some of the ways that I connect to what that is. And then they, they're given their medicine name. And then the other thing is, again, I pay attention to, where do they show up for people? So when I have clients come up, what's going on in their journey that a certain horse is resonating for them? And what are some of the things that are being stirred up for them? What's been a part of their journey up until that point? And where are they going? And then, it's always, I think, very fascinating that whoever is drawn, because in the work that I do, I just see who shows up for somebody. I don't really control that. And it's very, I think, powerful to see who steps in, but I definitely pay attention to who shows up when, and with what's going on for a person, and what's maybe a common theme around that as to why that certain horse comes in. So it's a combination of that, and I think trusting your intuition, and then really using that intention of connecting with your horse through that lens and perspective. So that's sort of what I would kind of speak to around that. Yeah.
Nice. I'm intrigued about the name changing. I've always been sort of very on the fence about that. I was years ago with Diva when I tried to change her name, and that was not happening. I tried to change it to like Deva, like fairy spirits or whatnot. Like I was like, I'll soften it a little bit. And no, it was just like not. And, so for me, I always have gone about asking the horse if that's something that wanting to have, something that you do when you're looking at a name. Like, do you kind of check in with them about something that you're cool with? Yeah. I have some of my horses that have the same names that they had when I met them. So some of them have kept their names. So for sure, and others, I think some of them just my Chief, my one gelding, his name was Hammer. It's so ridiculous. Some of them are just so terrible. And it just really didn't match their energy at all. But there's some that have kept there's some that have kept their names because it felt like that just fit who they are. And then, I just added around that, right? So they still have the same name, but, when somebody connects to them, I'm adding maybe a little bit of depth around, who the horse is. So yeah, sometimes I don't change their name. Probably, I would say 75% of them I have, but there's definitely a couple that have maintained their name, when I met them. Yeah. That's cool. So, I would love to hear, and I think there's a few people on the call, what is there one story that you have about, a horse that kind of has brought a particular medicine maybe to a few people, and how that kind of shows up in real time, so that we try to really get our heads around that concept.
Yeah. So, again, I think the horse that comes to mind, and I'm just same thing going with it because maybe her energy will land with this too, is actually Callie. So this mare, and so what's interesting about her, there's, for me, about the death and the rebirth, Kali, the Hindu goddess, and you can look about her, and she's a very fierce goddess. There's sort of a little bit of controversy around this air, and this mare is very, I would say, a little bit controversial. When she came into my herd, I have never had a horse. Well, now it's happened twice, but Kali really challenged for my lead mare position, and she was very fierce about it, and she was very aggressive. And she now, coming from a place of survival, right, where she had to probably fight for her survival, coming from a kill pen, she actually walked into my herd and started kicking other horses. Now, that behavior was corrected by the herd, but it really kind of stirred things up, and it made, I remember having 2 of the girls that were in my training program here, and they were really uncomfortable with her energy because it was aggressive. So, and as a mare, I think she's very fierce and unapologetic about it. And again, I think that fits with that sort of Kali thing. And then, so what was interesting for me is anytime we get triggered about something, we want to kind of look at why. Why are we triggered about this energy? And I think especially as women. So I kind of sat with this mare and I said, it's making us feel bad because she's kind of coming after my lead mare at the time, Tarina. And, Tarina's the queen. She's this big, beautiful gray mare. And we don't like that she's, being aggressive. But I got curious, and I kind of from Kali's lens, I said, what is this about? And I remember talking about it with these girls too that were my training, because it's also, if we want to be in integrity with this work, we can't impose our judgments onto our horses. And, there was something about her around worthiness, and that her coming in and claiming the space of leadership in the herd, because that was hers to claim, and she was worthy of that position. And I think that her thing of facing death in the eye and saying, not today, and I'm here, and kind of emerging through that, has been very powerful. So there has been, where she's shown up for women in particular, there has been something around not being afraid of really having that fierce self-worth of, I'm stepping into this space because it's mine to hold. I think especially around the leadership. And there's been a couple of times where, and again, she predominantly has done this with women, that's really landed for them in some aspect of their life where they're really struggling with the place of, can I claim this for myself? Am I worthy of it? And for us to not feel or judge that place of worthiness, or being that fierce about, this is mine. This space of leadership belongs to me. Tarina, my lead mare, is an older mare. She's in her 20s. She's not, she's physically compromised. So, for the betterment of the herd, right? You want a younger, fitter mare. That's how the herd survives. So she wasn't doing anything out of, the hierarchy. And she may have gone about it a little bit aggressively, because she didn't know any better. That was corrected, but it wasn't wrong of her to step into that. So I think that her in particular, I find, is her energy can be quite impactful for women. And I think the fierceness around how she really owns a space. And I think where, again, where the women who have been here, that's sort of been what they're being asked to do, is to really own the spaces they're being asked to claim, and to know their worthiness around that. And it's not a surface worthiness. It's you are worthy, and it's your space. It's yours to step into. So that's just, kind of coming to mind for me. So that that connection there of life, and being worthy of our life and worthy of our leadership, and really having a fierce calling to that. There's no meekness about this mare. This mare is so fierce. She's a 10, right? But sometimes we need to connect also to that fire. It's not about kind of meeking our way through something or being apologetic about it. And it's really sort of evoking that place of fierceness and tenacity. So that kind of comes to mind for me. And again, I think kind of where I connect to that is, and again, particularly with women, and obviously I work with a lot of women, that she's shown up and come to hold space for a woman. I'll offer that piece, and it usually really hits home for them of oh my God, this is totally landing for what I'm being invited to in my own life. And, that struggle sometimes we have of not feeling worthy of our space, or rocking the boat, even if it's in service of, right? It's in service of a greater whole. So that's an example, of that. And again, how that often manifests is, before I go into a session, I'll sit down, obviously, and we'll have a conversation with a client about why are they here, what's coming up for them. And then, we see which horse shows up. And that's the thing I'll pay attention to. It's like, here's the underbelly of what this horse is about. Does it land for you? And typically it does. So I don't know if that was a good example, but that's sort of the one that popped in my head.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I know one of the things that sometimes gets sticky, especially in this context of the apprenticeship, and people have these partnerships with horses, generally one horse, sometimes more. And I know that this a little, tender spot, shall we call it, with this is like, when our horse is not perfectly behaved, and when they're showing up in ways that we're like, when we're having a really, really hard time with what is showing up for us in a horse. So can you give us a little bit of your perspective on that level? Because I know there's some schools of thought, well, it's like, it's a total reflection and this is all about you. And I guess I can safely say I'm not in that camp. I know there's aspects of this. So
yeah,
you kind of work with that piece.
Yeah. So I think that, and I'll give another example because I have a really good horse that I could speak to about that. I think it's a blend. I definitely think these horses have personalities and they have their energies, and they're like that with everybody. So I don't think that it's completely pure to say it's all about you, right? Because and I'm thinking about the horse I'm going to talk about in particular. His name is Jet, and he's very assertive. And he's the only horse I've ever threatened to send to the meat market. I know that sounds horrible, but he's a bit of a bully, and he actually kicked the shit out of one of my other horses. And I was kind of like, look, buddy, like that behavior stops, you're out of here. That had nothing to do with me. That's his behavior. That's who he is as a horse, is his temperament. He's like that in the herd. It shows up everywhere. So I think that there's going to be that, just like we have personalities too, right? I mean, I am who I am. So I think that, like, definitely I would call him, I've had to really learn how to appreciate his medicine. And I can talk a little bit about what he taught me, because he's excuse my language, he's a bit of a jerk sometimes, especially with the other horses, like he's a bit of a bully. That's who he is. So I have 27 horses. They all have temperaments and personalities. It's not personal sometimes. It's like, that's who they are. So I think that, sometimes there is a horse that has a more dominant streak, or they are a bit of a bully. Callie, again, is my mare. She's I would consider her one of my bully, quote unquote, bully horses. And that's just who she is. So I think that, there's definitely a blend of, if a horse like that is showing up for you, what's the mirror for you in that? Because why is that energy showing up for you? So totally. And I think some of the behavioral things is going to be the horse, not necessarily us. So I think there definitely is kind of a yes and with that. I don't think we can purely look at, I'm impacting that. And I also think that there is impact, obviously. And I'll share what sort of helped me with a more challenging horse. So Jet, this horse actually bit me pretty hard one time, because I actually wasn't letting him be involved in a session, because I was actually really worried that he wasn't a safe horse to have, because he is very assertive. And he can kick. He's never kicked a person, but he kicks other horses. And so I'm very safety conscious about, when I'm bringing somebody into my field. And I was sort of uncomfortable with the way that he presented himself, because he can be very assertive. I also have this sort of balance of, I really want to give permission to my horses and who they are. And just because I'm uncomfortable with their energy doesn't mean they can't be themselves. So I actually tend to give, again, within safety precautions, obviously. I mean, he's a horse, when I first got him, also knowing his history, he's a standard bred. He probably was trained to race, and then he was a trail horse. he had no ground manners. I don't think he was ever taught ground manners. So he didn't know what was going on. So I had to work with him a little bit to kind of teach him those ground manners and what I expect from him and what's appropriate and what's not. He used to be really mouthy when I got here, and I really had to be like, dude, no biting. You got to find another way to communicate your message without using your mouth. Same with your feet. So, I think there's also this thing of what's appropriate behavior, what's not. If I'm bringing somebody into the field, they have to be respectful of that. So I was nervous because I wasn't sure I could trust him to be completely transparent because he was a little bit, and I've had to really work with him with that too. And there was also a way of like, I was getting triggered by his energy, and it was like, okay, so what can I not be with about him that I have to own? Because he is who he is. He's never going to be a different energy because that's just who he is. He's and you know what? There's really powerful medicine to his energy, right? Because so he got mad at me one day because I was just like, I don't want you in the space or involved in the session. He was like, fuck you, lady. I have a message, and you let everybody else share your message, but I'm not allowed because you can't handle me. I'm like, oh shit, you're right. So he kind of, totally. So I had to look at that. And so, again, there was a blend of, I have to work with him, and I did do a lot of groundwork. So just that he knows the boundaries of what's appropriate and what's not. And he has definitely calmed down a little bit in the sense of he doesn't kick as much and he doesn't bite anymore. But what he taught me was sometimes we need to be that assertive, and we don't assert ourselves. And so there's a thing with him about especially how easily we get knocked off on course and we let our fears derail us. And this horse, like, he's so assertive with what he believes. And it's like, sometimes we need a dose of that. Like, why are you letting yourself get pushed around? And he's one of the types of horse, like sometimes we need subtle and sometimes we need to get hit over the head with a 2x4, and he's a 2x4, So, so he has his purpose and he has his place. And I've had to learn how to really empower him in that. And also I got to get over where I'm uncomfortable with that energy, because that's about me. So if there's something we can't be with, we have to look at that. And I think we also have to create boundaries around respectful behavior. So I think it's a both thing. And I'm not going to change the personality of this horse. That's who he is. He's a bit of a bully. He's very assertive, and he's very communicative with his body language, and that's who he is. He's a good challenger and enforcer is sort of what I call him. And sometimes people need that, right? So he's a powerful teacher. And sometimes teaching is not comfortable, as we know with horses. Sometimes it's really not comfortable. I will tell you something. This horse challenges the hell out of people, and they get really uncomfortable. But you know what? The breakthroughs they get with him are like beyond. So again, there's that balance between he has to be respectful of what's appropriate, and I also have to appreciate what he brings to the table. And, he's a little bit extra, doesn't mean it's negative. So I think that's a both. I think I answered that question. So it's a both, and yeah.
Love that. Yeah, that's such a perfect thing. And I'm curious with him around, did you notice, from the time that he came into the herd, with the kind of shifts you've had in perspective with him, plus, setting those healthy boundaries with him, have you noticed any shift in him?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So like I said, the things I noticed, he doesn't kick as much. He's not biting. He's not mouthy. And it's a little bit of, I think it's also how we see our horses, right? So when we're projecting something onto them, we're creating an impact in that. So I had to really check myself a little bit of where I was making him wrong, and I was really triggered by him, and sort of I need to appreciate him and give him boundaries. But yeah, for sure. He doesn't, I never see him kick anybody anymore. And he doesn't bite. So those types of things that were really inappropriate, he's way more respectful of space than he was before. And some of that took time and attention with me with him, but also I had to I think what was really important, and this goes into like really honoring our horse partners, that, regardless of whether he's a challenging energy or not, I really need to respect him and who he is and really honor him as a teacher. And so just looking at Jet, so how long has Jet been in my herd? So interesting enough, Jet, I have a whole story with Jet. Actually, Jet is like, he's been a very impactful horse for me. He actually was living on this property when I bought it. He was a horse that was very clearly wanting to stay with me. So there was 18 horses here. This was a trail riding facility when I bought it. And I kind of had a feeling 4 horses were coming with me. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to choose them. So I actually went out in the herd one day and I said, okay, you guys tell me. And that horse lifted his head up and walked right over to me and was like, lady, I'm staying. So he's very clear, very assertive, knows what he wants. This is it. So he's been with me. He lived on this property before, and he's been here with my herd almost 4 years. But again, it was a change of what the person who ran a trail riding facility here didn't have a relationship with her horses. She didn't even know horse. She wasn't even a horse person. So she didn't know anything. So these horses really didn't have, I think, somebody that was really knowing how to kind of be with them. So he didn't have a lot of those manners, because I don't think nobody really ever developed a relationship with horses the way that, obviously I'm in a relationship with them. But he's kind of, and when I brought my horses here, he was like, walked right in the herd. I was like, oh, look here, my buddies are here. And so he's like, he just very self-assured. This horse is like super confident, very self-assured. But yeah, about 4 years that he's been with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I've met him then. I'm trying to think.
You have, yes. Yeah,
totally.
He's a big bay standardbred. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really, I love that perspective and recognize it. I think in my work, I've really realized that like it's never one thing, like, to put this is all a reflection. This is all behavior. This is all this. And I love that piece too, to really highlight an awareness of what we're projecting on our horses,
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting the last little while. This is a little slight aside for me, but I've been having this very interesting thing with my cat. And my cat is a very assertive, knows what he wants dude. And he has been pushing my butt so big time. Brittany knows this. I actually ended up figuring this. Oh yeah. That's cool. 4 years. So that they were saying we knew another standardbred called Jet.
I saw that.
Interesting. But yeah, it's intriguing because, of course, with my cat Parker, I've been like, he's such a jerk. He's basically been waking me up like all night long and like meowing in my window and like climbing like in through my bedroom door, like just, and then I just went, okay, like what's this about? And he's like a real snuggler. He's got that really, really, really need to be met, particularly around full moons. He's, so having to step back and be like, also, what do I need? And so I ended up being like, well, there's mice in the barn, Parker. So if you continue to wake me up all night long, then this is the thing that's going to happen. I'm going to lock you in the barn. There's going to be food and water. You can hang out and sleep, but this is the thing. So, and then it just totally changed. Last night, he was like, okay, I got it. And he didn't come in the house one time. And I was like, yeah. I have to let go of the projection of him being, a jerk. Yeah.
Yes.
Because he's got needs that he's wanting met, which is obviously what Jet's sharing.
Yes.
And they were very assertive about it. So, yeah. And I know you have other horses with other very cool medicines. I've met several of them. Is there any other ones that you kind of share about today for our last little bit that you've made a difference in your herd?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm just kind of rolling with like who's popping. You'll know the Malachi. You remember my big white draft horse. So yeah. So I'm just going with who's popping in my head. So he was a pony who we recently got, a pair of 2 draft horses that were rescued from the fires 2 summers ago, and then they got separated. So he came to my herd. I actually felt him a week before he came. I had this vision of this big white draft horse, and then he showed up. But why am I talking about him? So he's an interesting horse. So again, when he came here, very aloof. Super, super, super sensitive. You're not really getting into his space. Part of that is going to be his baggage for sure. I don't think he was treated very well, but also part of it is part of his energy for sure. I think like there's different horses in my herd. Some of them like different personalities, have zero personal space. He's somebody that has a really, really big bubble and a really big sensitivity. I think that it's been interesting. What's actually been interesting with him is his herd mate came back and people were like, oh, he always seems lonely to me. He seems like he's lonely because he kind of likes his own space, so people a lot project about him because, the herd will be somewhere and he's got his favorite places he is. And sometimes he's like in another field than the herd. So he's lonely, he's on his own. In his perspective, I say he doesn't think he's alone because his herd is right there. He just happens to kind of like his space. But there was an interesting thing, a projection with people. They're like, oh, his herd mate's coming back. He must miss her. He always seems like he's sad because he's on his own. And, Pony came into my herd was his herd mate. They were reunited and they definitely hung out for the first day or so. Then he's back to doing his thing. He's totally in his own world. So that had nothing to do with it. He wasn't in grieving. He's not sad. So I think what's very interesting about him is there's a lot of that projection that comes onto him. He's a loner. He's aloof. What's wrong with him? He wants to be on his own. And, I always sort of look at that thing of that's our human perspective of what this horse is inhabiting. As far as he's concerned, he's not alone. He's in a herd of 20 horses. He just happens to be in this corner doing his own thing because he likes the space. So I think that, he's been an interesting one that often evokes that. And he draws people in too, because he's this big, beautiful white horse, and he's I think he has an interesting kind of sense of humor. Like I always imagine like he's very sarcastic. Like I think he kind of has that, that tone to him. But, he's an incredible teacher, I think, also around sensitivity and authenticity. Like if you have an agenda that you want to go over and you want to touch him, it's like, forget about it. Like he wants nothing to do with you. And there's some horses like that. It's like, they're so sensitive to that tone. I watched a guy go over him and pet him. And he's not one that loves to have affection, right? And then he didn't think anything of it. And I think as soon as he switched into his own agenda of that relationship, Malachi was like out of there. Like, so it's very interesting, but he's one that often evokes both a lot of like, oh my God, who is this horse? Because he's beautiful. Call him my Pegasus, and he often occupies his own space. So I don't know why I'm talking about him, but he's been one I think that has had really beautiful moments of connection, but you really have to be in your authenticity with him. And also he gets a lot projected onto him around being a loner, being aloof, all of that stuff. And it's not, so that's, I think what's interesting about this work too. It's challenging people about our own filters of how we're seeing our horses and what stories we're making up about it based on what we're associating with it. It's like, that's not what that horse is experiencing. That's your experience of that horse. He's not experiencing that. So I think that's always an interesting dialogue too, in terms of projection of, I think really looking at, is that my experience of this horse? Or is that actually what that horse is experiencing?
And with that, I'm so curious to know, with those people that did project that onto him, for example, are they people maybe that are in a space of experiencing loneliness or are scared of being alone, or you know what I mean? That kind of, right? That there's a piece there for them that they're not getting yet, maybe, or
or belonging. They don't belong. That's a big one, I think, too, that sometimes gets triggered with him. It's like, that belonging thing. And, that's sometimes, my job is to sort of put it back on them and say, that's your mirror. So where is that resonating for you? And I think really, I think what's really important about this work is that we're kind of calling people on that, because I think there's a dance, which I'm sure that of interpretation. Look, all this stuff is open to interpretation. right?
Yeah.
So, for sure, 100%, right? I say it's not about being right or wrong. This is interpretation. And there definitely are times where we're in projection. And, you know, it's really being curious, I think, about what am I reading here and where is it coming from? And, you know, I will hold that back to people, say, oh, that horse is alone. He's alone, or he's sad, and be like, well, where are you picking that up? And where is that maybe part of your own experience? And, you know, look at from his, as a horse, he's not, that's not what's happening. You know, he's not on his own. He's just, you know, he sees his herd. They're like 10 feet away. Right. It's just like, yeah, no one's standing right next to him, but that's not, you know, so that's an interesting dialogue that often is as, evoked. But yeah, there's a lot of transference and projection that happens with him around that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So we'll go into question and answer in just a little bit. So everybody, if you've got questions, start writing, you can put them in the chat box. But I also, before we finish, just a little bit more in terms of practical things that we can do to, as horse people, to tune into what is the medicine. So, you know, is there a meditation that you do? Do you do journaling? Like what are some of the ways that you sort of access that information?
Yeah, so good question. And I think obviously we all have different ways that we connect. You know, I tend to be kind of a visual person in terms of I get impressions or I get visions. So I think that if I think journaling is a great thing sometimes because it gets us out of our head. And I would sort of say lead with curiosity instead of like trying to figure out what it is. Be curious. And some of the things sometimes I do is I'll sit in meditation sometimes and think of a horse, because oftentimes like I'm meeting these horses before they join my herd, and I have their medicine name as they come in. And I'll just sit with their energy and just kind of, you know, close my eyes and really kind of connect and feel it and be like, what am I feeling? And what am I getting? What are the impressions I'm getting? And again, the curiosity of like, what's happening in my life? What is the journey of this horse? And if you start writing and journaling some of these pieces, I find that something will emerge, you know. And I think the biggest thing is to trust what you get, right? Like I think, you know, trust what resonates with you. And then sometimes take it to the horse, honestly. Like, you know, maybe you've connected to something and go sit with the horse and see their response to it, right? Like how are they responding to it? But I think it's listening in a different way. It's not in our head. It's in our intuition and it's in our feeling. And I think what's great about journaling, if like some of the stuff is a little bit, you know, I'll answer Brittany's question too, because that's a good one. I think the journaling gets your head out of the way, and I would just say just journal and see what shows up. You know, try not to think about it, and use the intention. Like honestly, what's your medicine? And then sit with it and feel it. And the answer might not come right away, but there might be like little things like, you know, I don't know, for whatever reason, I saw the color blue, or I remember Indra, my first horse, and I was trying to come up with his name. His name was Stitches because he had cracked his head open. So it was like horrible. I didn't want to have him named Stitches. I kept seeing rain, like this image of rain. And I was like, I feel like there's like a Hindu something. So I actually Googled and I was like, what's the Hindu god for weather and rain? So sometimes I'm going up on Google, by the way. It's like I have a little bit of information. I'm like, I don't know what this is. Then I go and I Google it. And Indra was a Hindu god of weather and rain. What was also very interesting about that, here's like a cool connection thing. Indra was also the protector of horses as a god in Hindu tradition. Indra, my horse, that's his role in the herd. He definitely is, I would call him a protector of the herd. So that kind of fit really well with him. So sometimes it's cool. There's other layers to a symbolism of something that comes as well. So that's kind of cool.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, let's do a few questions. So this is from Alec, actually sitting with Brittany. So
okay. Yeah.
It's around what are your thoughts on anthropomorphic language when it comes to our horses? So what's the long?
Yeah. I think that's a very good question. And I would say, what would be my answer to that? I would agree. The same applies to the positive too. I think what we always need to know going into it is a curiosity of what's our filter. So when I have people interacting with my horses, I'm really bringing it back to their observation and their mirroring and having them own it. So what happens is, for sure, people come in, like I always joke, it's amazing to me how many people come in and suddenly they're horse experts. I've had people come and like say this whole story about one of my horses and being like, all right, cool. Like, nothing about this horse. So you're right. I think that there is sort of this blend of, again, having people really own their story of what they're projecting. And so the way that I kind of interpret that, or my answer to that would be, there's always for me when that observation and mirroring is happening, that we're taking ownership, that that's our mirror and that's what we're seeing. And where can we really own that? So it's not placed on the horse. The horse might be showing up as a mirror or symbol for you in that moment around that thing. That's what it's evoking. But it's your mirror that horse is becoming a medium or translator for. That it's not belonging to the horse. It's what's happening in connection to this particular horse that is yours. I don't know if that answers that question. That would be
and in the animal communication course that I teach, we talk a lot about neutrality, and it's this idea that the more neutral we become, the closer we are to truly getting a real impression of that animal, right? The less we are, the more we get all sorts of interesting things that are, that we're projecting or storying around or whatnot, right? So as we work and as we get into more neutrality, that really, really shifts. So yeah, I think that's perfect said, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I think the thing to know as humans, it's really impossible for us to not have a filter, right? Like I have a filter too. So I think that's part of the thing. We just have to know that that's where it's being filtered from. And I think that's the ownership piece of like, yes, that is my mirror and this is my lens that this horse is evoking for me. But it actually is not about the horse. It's about what I'm, receiving. And I think that discernment of where is this information coming from? Is it coming from a pure exchange here? Or is this a part of my story? So that's always the thing I kind of challenge with people is, where is that from? And that's your mirror. And we have filter and we have bias. That's not something we're ever going to get rid of, because that's part of the jam of being human.
It really, really is, for sure. Awesome. So I'm going to, if you're okay with it, we're going to unmute. And if anybody has questions here, hey, everybody, if you're making weird noises.
Hey.
Hi, Hillary. Hi, Alexa.
Hi, who's over
there?
Anna.
Hi,
Anna.
How you going?
I know Anna.
How you going, Hillary?
I actually disagree. Nice to see
nice
you.
to see you. Yeah, you too.
Oh, good to see you, Anna.
Yeah, you too. I can't see you though, Alexa.
You can't? Oh, I'm over somewhere. Over somewhere. I know Hillary's on the video.
Oh, that's why.
Do you have a question at all, Anna?
I probably don't, but I love Hillary, so I'm really enjoying the call. And
I'm so glad you're here.
I love the horse medicine that you bring in. I think it's great. Yeah, and it's so good for all of us, even to learn about what the medicine of our own horses are bringing to us as their caretakers. I've kind of been trying to explore that a little bit myself through your own teachings, and it's just so interesting. I'm not very good at it, but I'd really like to get, expand my own awareness a bit more around that.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, I think what I might say to that is, like, you'll have your version of what that is in connection to your horses, right? I have mine. And I think it's like, so I wouldn't compare it, because I have my version of how it is interpreted for me. And you'll have what that looks like for you and your horses too. So it's just, I'm kind of offering kind of, this is how I connect to it. And I would also encourage, that's my interpretation of it. And, you will have what yours is and what's developed between you and your own horse. that's kind of authentic to you guys. Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, thanks for being
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yay. Does anybody else have a question?
I do.
Who's that?
It's Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Hey, I wanted to know a little bit kind of about the retreats that you do. What do they
Perfect.
what do they look like, and what do you hope for people to gain, learn, experience from them? I did read through your website and things like that, but it's neat to hear from you.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think that there's I guess a couple, it depends on the theme of the retreat, obviously, I think for me in terms of the takeaway. Alexa, I think you have the most background noise on your thing.
Yeah, I'll turn it off.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So, so I think a couple of things. I think that the bulk of, I think, my passion of bringing people with horses, because I think that there's a lot that horses teach us that I think kind of right some of the dysfunctions of human beings, right? Of where we're dysfunctional as humans. So I think that there's always a thing that what I hope people get away from it is learning from how horses just operate as prey animals and what we can learn from them about being more efficient and congruent in our own lives. So I think that that's always a fascinating thing of what can we learn about from how horses operate authentically that sort of helps us in our human dysfunction. So, I'm thinking, for example, like a lot of the mirroring I kind of speak to is just like, horses as prey. And one of the things I notice I talk a lot about with my groups is efficiency, and how horses as prey animals are so efficient in their energy consumption. Because as a prey animal, if they're running around stressed out all the time and they actually have something they have to flee, that's a dead horse, right? I find a lot of, for us as human beings, one of the things that challenges us all the time is staying present, not feeding our energy in stress or chaos or things that happened 2 weeks ago. And then we don't ever come back down to like our, let's say homeostasis, because we're so stressed about everything. So I find just being with horses, we learn how to regulate ourselves better. So I think my hope is that, beyond the theme of the retreat, when somebody comes and works with horses, they have this ability, a pathway to regulate and be conscious of where their energy is being consumed within them in their life, right? And so I think that there's that piece of awareness around that, just being with horses. I think the thing that's really important to me, and this is in terms of how I facilitate with my herd, a lot of it, again, is I just go out to the herd and we interact with the herd, because I think it's not about us, our interpretations of horse language, it's the horse's interpretation of it, right? So it's just really learning from them. And I think what we can learn just from horses that can really benefit, living healthier lives. And just, I think, that sort of authentic operating system within ourselves. So that's a piece of it. And then I think for the other sets, it depends on the theme of the retreat, right? So like, for my Women Who Run with Horses retreat, a lot of the intention is around purpose. And so I think what I really want to give people is an awareness of what we're operating through in our lives, and the clarity of, I think, landing in something that is, obviously I do a lot of purpose work, but what's my purpose? And also what gets in my way of living in congruence with the things that are really meaningful to me. And I think horses are really great at shedding light of, what is that dysfunction that we don't see in feedback with other humans in a way that we can receive. So I hope that people walk away with, I think, a self-awareness. I think a tool set of knowing when I go back into my life and chaos happens and life happens, that I know how to reroute myself, and I don't get pulled into the chaos. Like I know how to pull myself back. I know what my congruence is. A lot of people don't even know what congruence means, or how that shows up, or what authentic is to them, or when they're operating from fear. And they don't know how to bring themselves out of that. So I think kind of helping people have that pathway and that set of tools that they can go back into their world. And I often say, like, listen, you're going to go back into life and shit's going to happen. But now hopefully you're going to be able to respond to that it's not going to pull you off course so much. And you can remember, and I've seen it, where people say like their relationships change, the way they communicate. Because, here's a really cool thing. I had a woman come to me for a private retreat around dysfunctions in her relationship. and she wanted to talk about how her partner was dysfunctional. What did she discover with the horses? Where she was contributing to the dysfunction, where she was dysfunctional. Yeah. And so it gave her her whole awareness of like, oh shit, this is what I brought to the table. And so, you know, that dysfunction's not happening in her world anymore. So I think there's that awareness piece, giving new tools. And then, you know, I think people being able to be revealed with themselves about where their dysfunctions are that maybe they don't want to look at or they're not seeing. I think with horses, I think there's a receptivity where we can receive feedback on ourselves that we don't often, you know, we don't want to see because we're afraid of being judged or whatnot. So I think it kind of changes the landscape. And I think internally too, you know, I think a lot of our struggles is our own inner conflict. So I think, you know, I also want to help people with, you know, not being in so much conflict internally and knowing how to source out that place of authenticity and what that feels like in their life to benefit, you know, relationships. And obviously for me, there's a courage about living a purposeful, authentic life. So I think that kind of leans into it. And then, you know, so that's sort of my hope. And I think really exposing people to what horses can teach us about those places that we're dysfunctional as humans, you know, because there's lots of those areas. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
How do people get in touch with you, Hillary?
Best place through my website, hillaryschneider.com. And then also, you know, people are welcome to follow me on Facebook, on Hillary Schneider, or I have Women Who Run with Horses is another kind of branch of my work. And then I have a podcast too. Alexa was on the podcast, Women Who Run with Horses as well. So if people want to, I think it's on iTunes. Oh, okay. Awesome. Yeah. So that's my podcast, or Hillary Schneider or Women Who Run with Horses is sort of kind of where you can check out some of my stuff. Yeah.
Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Hillary, for coming on and joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really fun. I know I learned some things. I hope everybody out there and you all here learned some things. Yeah, we really, really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording now. Perfect.